Christmas dinner should have been small and quiet, the sort of holiday that settles into your bones like a warm blanket. Instead, it turned into the moment everything changed. We were at the table, just me, my son Noah, his wife Claire, and a few plates that had seen better days. The tree in the corner blinked like it was trying to smile. The candles sputtered in gentle drafts, and for a minute I allowed myself to think this could be one of those ordinary good nights. Noah had been away on a trip and had come home that afternoon, hair a little messy from travel and eyes brighter than I'd seen in a while. He had a way of asking questions that sounded like gifts. "Did you like the car I left for you?" he asked across the table, like he was waiting for a surprise to land soft and sure. I blinked. For a second, I thought he was teasing me. Then I realized he meant it. "What car?" slipped out of my mouth, simple and offhand. I don't know why I said it. Maybe because the holidays make your mind soft, or because I'd been distracted by the cranberry sauce, or because the idea of someone buying me a car still felt like a story from someone else's life. Whatever the reason, my 3 words landed in the room like a pebble in a quiet pond. Claire's face went a color I'd only ever seen in hospital waiting rooms and stage sets. It drained, then paled, then looked almost painted with white. Her hand creased the stem of her wine glass until the glass tipped and toppled, and red spread across the table and then onto the floor like a slow, deliberate mistake. She made a sound, a small, practiced intake, and then she folded as if pulled by strings. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Noah was on his feet, the chair skidding back on wood, his face sharp with instinct. "Claire," he shouted, hands already reaching. The rest of the world narrowed to the person on the floor. People do strange, private things when the person they love appears to be hurt. The first thing you feel is disbelief. The second is protection, and the third is that old, fierce need to fix whatever's wrong. Noah crouched and cradled her head like a boy again. Claire's eyelids trembled like curtain fabric in a draft. Her lips made a small, wet sound that might have been a sob, might have been an actor's cue. I watched all this and felt something odd loosen inside me, a small tightness I couldn't name yet. We bundled her into the car. Noah kept asking questions. My voice sounded tiny from the passenger seat, and Claire leaned into him, delicate and fragile and exactly how she wanted to appear. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, staring at the back seat where she lay, and thinking about the way people perform when they want you to believe they're helpless. I told myself not to be uncharitable. People faint from shock, from fear, from sudden blood pressure drops. But there was a choreography to Claire's movement that didn't fit the chaos of a real accident. The timed slips of breath, the way she let her arm fall perfectly, so the wine glass rattled to the floor, the small, efficient pause before the cry. She was very good at being hurt. At the hospital they wheeled her into a bright room with the efficient hum nurses make when they're used to crisis. Machines beeped the way they always do in hospitals, steady and uncaring. She lay there with her head on the pillow, and her hair splayed like something from a painting, eyes flickering between closed and open, like a stage light too sensitive. The nurses checked vitals, took a temperature, asked the routine questions, in the smooth voice of people who have asked the same ones 1,000 times. Claire answered with tears that seemed to gather on cue. I watched from the chair and felt the knot in my chest grow into a rope. It wasn't just that she said she'd wrecked the car that Noah said he'd bought for me. It was the way the story slipped from her mouth, as though it had been rehearsed. The roads were slick, the other driver left, the frame was bent, I had to sell it for parts, and then the shaky, perfect apology aimed at Noah. His face softened the way a man's does when he wants to protect someone he loves. I have spent a lot of nights awake, so many that my back remembers the shape of kitchen chairs in the dark. I have learned to read the small human things that give people away, the blink that comes a moment too late, the hesitation before a name, the way the hand that's supposed to tremble with shock is steadier than the one that is supposed to be calm. In hospital light, these little tells stand out like fishbones. I saw Claire reach for Noah's hand with a trembling that could have been real, but the fingers tapped his wrist in a rhythm that felt practiced, like someone counting beats in a song. Noah's reaction was immediate and pure. He believed her. He wanted to believe her. He moved in ways I had watched him move when he was 6, and someone on the playground had fallen, instinct first, thought later. The car in question, which had been set to arrive earlier in the week, had vanished from his story, and that blank space in the timeline made my skin crawl. I let him have the moment with Claire at the hospital, because there are times when love is the only shield a person has. You do not take it away for a hunch. But even as the doctor advised rest and observation, and we went home with a story that pulled at Noah's heart, the seed of doubt had been planted. The seed was small, and in the hospital light it looked almost like a harmless weed. It was the sort of thing you could forget if you chose to. But mothers learn to listen to the alarm bells that go off inside of them, those low, persistent noises that say someone is not telling the truth. On the short drive home, Noah fussed over Claire as though she had been through something unspeakable. She leaned her head against him and let him, and I sat in the front seat and watched both of them from a distance that was both place and feeling. I watched Claire's face in the rearview mirror and saw for one quick moment a softness slip away and something colder take its place. It was only a glance, a flash of calculation that someone might never notice unless they were trained to look for the edges, where a lie peels back from the truth. I did not want to see it, but I did. The rest of the night was a blur of small, ordinary chores, performed with a sense of unease. When someone you love has been hurt, you go on autopilot and still manage the washing, the emptying of a dishwasher, the filling of a mug. My hands moved while my mind started ticking through questions. Who had delivered that car? Why had I not seen this woman with a story like that before? Why did a simple question about a gift turn a holiday into an emergency room script? I told myself I would call the dealership in the morning, nothing more than an ordinary check-in. But in the quiet hours of that night, with Christmas lights blinking and the house breathing around me, the question, "What car?" kept returning like a chorus. It felt small and at the same time enormous, as though the whole thing hinged on that single phrase. I did not know then how much that one question would unravel. I only knew its edges, how it felt to ask and be met with a performance, and I knew deep down where mothers keep their stubbornness, that I would not let it rest until I knew the truth.
Before I continue, I want to ask all of you to please give a like to this video and subscribe to my channel, The Silent Stories, for more stories like mine. Your support means the world to me. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from, so drop a comment telling me which country you're tuning in from. It's incredible to see how far this community of wonderful people has grown, and I'm so grateful to be able to share my story with you.
People often imagine that betrayal begins with a single moment. One choice, one lie, one accident of fate. But the truth is, betrayal is rarely born in a moment. It grows slowly, like ivy curling around brick, unnoticed, until one day you see the wall beneath is crumbling. To understand what happened at that Christmas dinner, you'd have to know the years that led up to it, the long path that carried us to that table. And to understand that path, you'd have to know about me, about my son Noah, and about the man who disappeared from our lives almost 30 years ago. Noah was only 3 when his father, Martin, walked out the door. I still remember the sound of that door closing. It was quiet. No slam, no shouting, no dramatic goodbye. Just a soft click, and then silence so deep I could hear my son's little voice in the other room, asking if Daddy would be back soon. He wouldn't be. Not the next day. Not the next week. Not for nearly 3 decades. At first, I thought maybe he was just running away from a fight, from bills, from the weight of being needed. But as the months stretched into years, the truth settled in. Martin hadn't gone to catch his breath. He'd gone because he didn't want the life he had. I didn't have the luxury of leaving. I had a toddler to raise, rent to pay, and no one else to lean on. Those early years were survival, pure and simple. I worked mornings at a diner, afternoons cleaning offices, and weekends stocking shelves at the corner grocery store. There were nights I came home so tired, I fell asleep in my uniform at the kitchen table with Noah's coloring book spread in front of me. He'd sit beside me, humming little songs to himself, while I tried to keep my eyes open long enough to spell words out loud so he could write them. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Noah was different from other kids, though I didn't fully see it until he was older. He had a mind that never stopped pulling things apart and putting them back together. At 8 years old, he was dismantling the toaster just to see how it worked. At 10, he was building little programs on the family computer, things I didn't understand, but that made his eyes light up with pride. I used to joke that while I barely knew how to send an email, he'd probably be selling inventions to NASA before he hit 18. He wasn't NASA-bound, but I wasn't that far off. By the time Noah was in his 20s, he'd taught himself how to code and had started his own software business. I didn't fully understand what he did, but I understood the results. Clients calling at all hours, investors asking to meet, money starting to flow in. For a boy raised on hand-me-down sneakers and boxed macaroni, it was like stepping into another world. The newspapers even ran a story about him. The local kid who made it big, they printed his photo, smiling in front of a laptop, and wrote about how his company was valued in the millions. I cut that article out and kept it folded in my wallet, the same way I'd once kept his crayon drawings. It should have been just a proud moment. Instead, it was the opening that let something dangerous back into our lives. Because not long after that article ran, Martin reappeared. 27 years after leaving, he showed up at Noah's office with excuses I didn't want to hear. He said he'd been lost. Young, scared, ashamed. He said he thought Noah would be better off without him. He spoke with that same smoothness he always had. The kind of voice that could sell you a broken watch and make you believe it was gold. And the cruelest part was, Noah wanted to believe it. You have to understand something. When a child grows up without a father, they don't just miss the man. They build him up in their imagination. They picture noble reasons for his absence. Maybe he was protecting them. Maybe he was working far away. Maybe he wanted to come home, but couldn't. It's easier for a child to believe in a heroic absence than a selfish one. For Noah, his father's return meant maybe all those secret hopes were true. Maybe he hadn't been abandoned. Maybe his father really had loved him all along. I knew better. But what could I do? Telling a grown man the truth about his father is like trying to wake someone who doesn't want to stop dreaming. Noah welcomed Martin with open arms. They went to dinners, caught up on years they'd never had, and slowly, Martin inserted himself into Noah's life as if he'd never been gone. 6 months later, Martin introduced Noah to Claire. She was younger than him, polished, attentive, the sort of woman who could smile and make you feel like the only person in the room. I'll admit, she seemed lovely at first. She listened when Noah talked, laughed at his jokes, and spoke often about wanting a family. Noah was charmed, and I could see why. For a man who'd been starved of family for so long, she seemed like a dream delivered by fate. They dated for a year and married in a small ceremony that I barely had a role in. I remember sitting in the pew watching my son beam with joy and feeling both happiness and a strange unease I couldn't name. It wasn't that Claire had done anything wrong, not yet. It was the speed of it all, the way Martin hovered nearby like a director watching his play unfold. Still, I told myself it was just me being protective. Noah deserved happiness, and if Claire gave him that, who was I to complain? He moved to another city with her. For a while things seemed fine. He visited when he could, always spoke about how grateful he was to have a wife, and even said he felt lucky to finally have both a father and a partner. He was building the family he'd always wanted, the family Martin had once taken away. But here's what I know now. Sometimes people arrive in your life, not because fate is kind, but because they've been watching, waiting for the right moment. And sometimes the people who return aren't coming back to heal wounds. They're coming back because they smell opportunity. So when Noah sat at that Christmas dinner table years later, asking me about a car I'd never seen, and when Claire collapsed into her faint with perfect timing, it wasn't just an odd scene. It was the culmination of years of hunger, hope, and lies. It was the moment when the cracks that had been forming slowly began to split wide open. I didn't know everything yet, but I knew enough to feel the old instinct rising inside me, the one that had carried me through years of raising a boy alone. That instinct whispered one clear message: protect him, because even at 30 years old, even with millions in the bank, my son was still vulnerable to the people who knew exactly how to exploit his heart. The story of the car began long before Christmas dinner, though I didn't know it at the time. It began with a phone call from Noah, his voice bright with excitement, the way it had been when he was a boy, bringing home a test with a gold star. "Mom," he said, "I've got something for you. An early Christmas present." He was out of town on business then, working late nights in hotel rooms and calling me whenever he could. He told me he'd arranged for Claire to deliver the car to me while he was away. "She'll drop it off in a couple of days," he said. "I wanted to surprise you, but I couldn't wait to tell you. You've gone long enough without a reliable one. This is my way of saying thank you." I remember sitting at my kitchen table with the phone pressed to my ear, the kettle whistling in the background, feeling something swell in my chest. A car. I hadn't asked for one. I'd never let myself dream of such things. For years I'd driven whatever I could afford, hand-me-downs, patched-up second-hand vehicles that coughed and rattled, but got me from A to B. A brand-new car felt like something meant for other people, not me. But Noah's voice was so sure, so full of joy, that I let myself believe in the gift. The car never came. Days passed, then weeks. At first, I told myself maybe Claire had been busy, or perhaps Noah had the timing mixed up. I didn't ask, not wanting to seem ungrateful or suspicious. But as the days turned into a full week, and then another, the silence around that gift grew heavy. Still, I said nothing. After all, Noah had just come back from travel. He was tired, adjusting, and the last thing I wanted was to dampen his spirits with questions. Which brings us back to that Christmas dinner. When Noah asked me how I liked the car, it was the first chance he'd had to follow up. He expected me to say thank you, to gush about the leather seats or the smooth ride. Instead, I said, "What car?" and watched the room tilt sideways. That's when Claire collapsed into her performance. That's when the wine spilled across the floor. That's when we ended up at the hospital. And she spun her story like a spider weaving a web. Her tale was tragic in all the right ways. Rain-slick roads, a reckless driver who came out of nowhere, a crash at the intersection near my house. The frame bent so badly it wasn't worth repairing. A quick sale for parts to cover towing costs. She even added the detail of being too shaken to tell anyone right away. It was smooth, almost too smooth, like lines rehearsed in a mirror. Noah swallowed every word. I could see the guilt settle into his shoulders, the same guilt he'd carried since childhood. He immediately blamed himself for asking her to handle the delivery. He told her not to worry, that the important thing was she was safe, that I'd get another car soon. I stayed quiet. What else could I do? If I pushed too hard, I'd look paranoid. If I accused her outright, Noah would defend her. He always defended the people he loved, even when they didn't deserve it. But inside, my thoughts were sharp. Why hadn't she called Noah after the crash? Why hadn't she called me? If it happened so close to my house, why had there been no police report, no tow truck, no insurance claim, and most of all, why did her face go white the second Noah asked about the car? When we left the hospital that night, Noah drove us home, fussing over Claire in the back seat. She leaned against him, fragile, pale, and perfectly convincing. But in the reflection of the automatic doors as we walked out, I caught something that made my breath stop. Her mask slipped. It was only for a second, but I saw it. Her expression shifted from weak and wounded to sharp and calculating, her eyes cold and her lips pressed into a line of satisfaction. The performance was over, and in the split second before she realized I was watching, her real self peeked through. By the time we reached the car, she was back to looking helpless. But I had seen enough to know my instincts weren't wrong. That night, as Noah settled her into bed and sat at her side like a guardian, I stood in the hallway, listening to the quiet murmur of his voice. He stroked her hair, told her everything would be okay, that he'd fix it all. I wanted to shake him. I wanted to say, "Open your eyes, son. She's not who you think she is." But I didn't, because I knew from years of being his mother that if I said it too soon, he wouldn't hear me. He would turn against me to protect her. Love has a way of making people deaf to warnings. So instead, I carried my suspicion in silence, like a stone in my pocket, heavy, unspoken, always there. That night, when I finally lay in my own bed, the questions circled my mind like vultures. Had the car ever existed in her hands at all? Had she sold it before Noah even came home? Was the entire fainting spell nothing but a diversion to keep us from asking too many questions? I thought about the years I had spent raising Noah alone, how I had shielded him from the world's sharp edges, worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, stayed up late to help him with homework, even when my eyes could barely stay open. I thought about the way I had taught him to be honest, to work hard, to see the good in people. And now, here he was, a grown man, successful, wealthy, but blind to the danger sitting beside him in his own home. That was when I made a decision. I would not sit quietly while someone I barely trusted chipped away at the son I had spent 30 years protecting. If Claire thought she could lie her way through this, she had picked the wrong family to deceive. But suspicion alone wouldn't save him. I needed proof. Hard, undeniable proof. Something he couldn't dismiss with a wave of his hand or a soft excuse about stress or trauma. The car was the beginning. A missing gift, a phantom accident, a performance too perfect to be real. It was the loose thread, and I knew if I pulled on it carefully, the whole tapestry of lies would unravel. I just had to be patient. And patience, after all, was something I had mastered a long time ago. Back when I was waiting for rent checks to clear, waiting for school buses to arrive, waiting for my son to come home safe. I had been patient all my life. Now I would use that patience for something new. Uncovering the truth. Because this wasn't about a car anymore. It was about trust, about family, about the people circling my son like wolves in holiday clothing. And I wasn't about to let them feast on him. The morning after Christmas, I woke with a heavy head, the kind that comes from carrying too many thoughts through the night. The house was still, sunlight creeping through blinds in tired slants, and for a moment I almost convinced myself I had dreamed the whole thing, the faint, the hospital, the story about the crash. But the silence didn't feel restful. It felt thick, like the air was holding its breath. I made coffee, strong and bitter, the way I always had since the years when I needed it to keep moving from job to job. Sitting at my kitchen table, I pulled the phone closer. If Claire's story was true, there would be a record. Accidents leave trails, police reports, insurance claims, tow slips. Lies, though, leave nothing but words. I dialed the dealership first. My voice was polite, casual, almost cheerful. "Hi, this is Elena Carter. I believe my daughter-in-law picked up a car from you about 10 days ago. A silver sedan? I just had a few questions." The man on the other end, Jake, he said his name was, answered without hesitation. "Oh sure. I remember that delivery. Beautiful car, leather seats, top package." She was thrilled when I dropped it off. Signed the paperwork with the biggest smile. Even took pictures with it, like it was a birthday. Pictures. My grip on the mug tightened. Jake chuckled softly. She even asked about resale value. Thought it was odd, since most folks don't think about selling a car the same day they get it. But hey, everyone's got their quirks. Resale value. The phrase hit me like a pebble against glass. I kept my voice steady. Did she mention anything about the car being damaged? Or about an accident? Accident? Jake's tone sharpened with surprise. "No, ma'am. That car was in perfect shape when I handed it over. Not a scratch. And she sure didn't seem worried about any accident. She seemed relieved, actually. Said something about solving financial problems. Solving financial problems." My stomach sank. I thanked him and hung up. The room felt colder than it had a moment before. Claire hadn't been shaken. She hadn't been traumatized. She'd been calculating, smiling, asking about how quickly she could turn a gift into cash. I pushed aside my coffee and reached for my laptop. If there had been a crash anywhere near my house, the police would have a record. The insurance companies too. I searched accident reports for the past 2 weeks. Nothing. I searched news alerts. Nothing. Not one mention of a silver sedan wrecked at the corner Claire described. It was as if the accident had never existed, because of course it hadn't. When Noah came home for lunch that day, he looked tired but lighter, like being back at work had settled him. He made himself a sandwich in my kitchen, mustard smudged at the edge of the counter, and hummed the way he sometimes did when he was distracted. I decided to test the waters. "Honey, maybe we should help Claire file an insurance report," I said carefully. "Even if the car was totaled, there might be money to recover." He barely looked up from his bread. "She already handled it, Mom. She said the other driver fled. No insurance, no witnesses, one of those hit-and-run cases." "How convenient," I said under my breath. "What?" "Nothing. Just seems strange, that's all." "No report? No tow record? Did the police come?" Noah sighed, the way he had when he was a teenager, and I questioned his homework. "Mom, she was traumatized. She might have forgotten details. Please, just give her a break." I wanted to shout. I wanted to tell him the dealership story, the photos, the resale questions, but the look on his face stopped me. He was already on the defensive, already choosing her story over my doubt. If I pushed harder, I'd lose the small space I still had in his ear. So I bit my tongue and let him eat his sandwich. But inside, I felt the stone in my pocket grow heavier. That evening, Martin joined us for dinner. He'd been coming around more often, sliding back into our lives with practiced ease. He told a long story about his so-called business ventures over the past 27 years. I listened with half an ear, noting the vague timelines, the fuzzy details. It sounded like a patchwork quilt stitched from magazine headlines. Then he looked at Noah with careful seriousness. "About that investment opportunity we talked about last week, son. It's moving quickly. Might need to move some capital sooner than expected." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. Noah's face lit up. "Of course, Dad. Just tell me how much and when." I nearly choked on my wine. Martin smiled, humble in a way that looked rehearsed. "Only if it's not too much trouble. Just until the deal closes next month." Noah nodded like it was nothing, like money was water, and Martin was thirsty. I excused myself to the kitchen and stood at the sink, staring at the dishwater swirling down the drain. The seeds of doubt were no longer just about Claire. They had spread, rooting deep, winding toward Martin too. Later that night, as I loaded dishes, I caught sight of them through the patio window. Martin and Claire outside together. They stood close, heads bent in conversation, too close for in-laws, too familiar for casual talk. When Noah appeared with his coffee, they stepped apart instantly, switching topics like teenagers caught in a lie. It was only a glance, but I saw it. I saw the way their eyes darted, the way their bodies shifted. Not love, no, not even affection, but collusion, a shared secret. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, questions tumbling over each other. The missing car, the phantom accident, the dealership's account, the convenient timing of Martin's return, the quiet, careful talks on patios and in coffee shops. One detail on its own could be explained. Together, they formed something else entirely, a picture that was darker, sharper, and far more dangerous. I thought about Noah, his trusting nature, his hunger for family, his tendency to believe in the good of people, even when the evidence said otherwise. He had built a company, but when it came to reading people, he was still a boy hoping for his father's approval, still a man desperate to believe his wife's tears. I could feel something tightening around him, a net he couldn't see, and I knew then, as I lay in the dark, that my role hadn't ended just because he was grown. A mother doesn't retire. She doesn't clock out when her child turns 18 or 30 or even 50. My job had always been to protect him. And if Martin and Claire thought I wouldn't do the same now, they didn't know me at all. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and I was ready to water them until the truth grew so tall, Noah would have no choice but to see it. Doubt is like a whisper. At first, it nags quietly, almost too soft to notice. But once you let it in, it gets louder, steadier. until it fills every room you walk through. By the time the new year rolled around, my doubts about Claire and Martin weren't whispers anymore. They were a drumbeat in my head. I knew I needed more than feelings. Feelings are easy to dismiss, especially when a son loves the people you're questioning. I needed proof. Not just hunches, not just suspicions. Evidence. Something Noah couldn't brush aside with a tired sigh and a plea for me to give them a break. So I did something I never imagined I would do at my age. I became a watcher. The first time I followed Claire. It wasn't even intentional. I'd gone to the mall to return a sweater, a Christmas gift from a neighbor that was 2 sizes too big. I was wandering near the food court, sipping a bad cup of coffee, when I saw her. Claire. Alone. She wasn't shopping. She wasn't carrying bags. She was standing near the entrance, checking her phone, glancing around in a way that didn't look casual. I ducked behind a kiosk, selling cheap jewelry, and watched. 10 minutes later, Martin walked in. He didn't greet her like family. No hug, no wave, just a nod. They moved together toward a corner table near the bookstore, a spot half hidden by a decorative pillar. I drifted closer, pretending to admire bracelets at the kiosk. My ears aren't what they used to be, but I caught fragments. "She's asking too many questions," Claire whispered. Martin leaned in. "Doesn't matter. Noah won't believe her. He never does." My stomach dropped. They were talking about me. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking, and managed a blurry photo. The image was grainy, but it showed them together, heads bent, their expressions tense. Not father-in-law and daughter-in-law, not casual family, something else, something secret. That night, I showed the photo to Noah. He squinted, sighed, shook his head. "Mom, they're family. Of course they talk. Maybe they're planning a surprise for you. Or maybe Dad needed advice and didn't want to bother me while I was at work." I wanted to scream. How could he not see it? But I swallowed the frustration. If I pushed too hard, I'd drive him deeper into their arms. So I decided to keep watching. The next week, I went back to the mall. Same spot, same table. And there they were again. Claire first, Martin after. No shopping bags, no family chatter, just serious conversation. I sat at a table in the food court with a book and pretended to read. My coffee went cold as I strained to catch words. "Timing's important," Martin muttered. "We can't rush," Claire replied. It was vague, but the tone was clear. This wasn't idle talk. This was planning. I started noticing patterns. They always arrived separately, never together. They never sat near windows. They kept their voices low, their faces close. When Noah joined them unexpectedly once, I saw the shift with my own eyes. Their bodies straightened, their tones lightened, and the conversation flipped to small talk. It was like watching actors change costumes mid-scene. But the mall wasn't their only stage. At a coffee shop near downtown, I caught them again. Same setup. Claire ordering her caramel drink, Martin with his plain black coffee. Always the same, always deliberate. I'd gone there 3 times before I finally saw them, and when I did, I nearly dropped my cup. The young barista wiping tables noticed my gaze. "Oh, those two," she said, lowering her voice. "They come here a lot, once or twice a week. Always the same drinks, same corner table. Kind of intense, if you ask me." "Intense how?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "They don't laugh, don't relax. They act more like business partners than family. Always looking around, like they don't want anyone overhearing." Business partners. The phrase chilled me. I thanked her, sat back down, and tried not to let my hands shake as I stirred sugar into my coffee. Business partners. Not family, not even friends. Partners. In what though? Everywhere I went, I saw pieces of the puzzle, little moments that didn't fit the picture they presented to Noah. And with each observation, my certainty grew. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't me being a bitter mother-in-law. Something was wrong. At night, I'd lie awake replaying everything. Claire's fainting act, the dealership call, the missing police report, the hushed mall meetings, the coffee shop conversations. The way Martin's stories about his business ventures never added up. The way Claire's face hardened when she thought no one was looking. It all pointed in one direction. I started writing things down. Dates, times, locations, what they ordered, how long they stayed, what little words I caught. My notes looked like something out of a detective's journal, scribbled lines of suspicion and half-caught conversations. I kept them tucked away in a folder at the back of my desk drawer, hidden from Noah. Not because I wanted to deceive him, but because I knew he wasn't ready to see it. One night, after another fruitless attempt to warn him, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my messy notes. My pen tapped the wood in frustration. I thought of all the years I'd spent teaching Noah to be kind, to trust, to believe in people. And now, those very qualities were the reason he couldn't see the danger right in front of him. He believed in them because he needed to. Because believing otherwise meant facing the fact that the father he'd longed for and the wife he'd chosen were not what they seemed. That truth was too sharp for him to touch. But for me, I'd handled sharp truths before. I'd handled abandonment, bills, and long nights alone. I could handle this one too. The surveillance, my quiet little missions, became more than just habit. They became my way of protecting him. Watching, listening, waiting for the slip that would give me undeniable proof. Because one thing was clear now. Claire and Martin weren't just talking, they were planning, and whatever they were planning, it wasn't about love or family or building a future. It was about taking something, and I wasn't about to let them take my son down with them. There's a difference between suspicion and proof. Suspicion lives in whispers and gut feelings. Proof lives on paper and in recordings. The kind of things you can hold in your hands and put on a table where no one can ignore them. By the time January deepened into its second week, I knew suspicion wasn't enough. If I wanted to save Noah, I needed proof. It started with the papers. Noah has always hated paperwork. Even as a boy, he'd push his school forms in front of me with a sigh, asking me to read the fine print while he focused on his math problems. That habit never left him. As a man, he built a company worth millions, but when it came to the details, tax forms, contracts, household accounts, he left them for others. Claire had slid neatly into that role. She presented him with neat stacks of papers, explained them quickly, and he signed without hesitation. One afternoon, while visiting Noah's house, I lingered near his office door. He sat at his desk, pen in hand, signing a pile of documents Claire had left for him. I watched from the hallway as he moved through the stack with mechanical ease, his signature flowing without pause. He didn't even read the headers. I asked, casually, "What are those?" "Just financial stuff," he said, without looking up. "Expense reports. Some investments Claire set up, tax prep. You know how I hate this stuff. She handles it better than I ever could. Do you review them before you sign?" He chuckled, still signing. "Why would I? I trust her. She explains the important ones. The rest are just routine." Routine. That word stuck to me like glue. When he left later that evening for a client dinner, I stood in that office alone. The room smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, the desk lamp casting a yellow glow over the papers he'd left behind. My heart pounded as I slid the stack closer. The documents looked professional at first glance. Clean letterheads, corporate-sounding names. But something was off. The company addresses weren't offices. They were P.O. boxes, the phone numbers linked to answering services. A quick online search for two of the companies turned up nothing. They didn't exist outside these papers. I snapped photos with my phone. Each click of the camera shutter echoing in the quiet house. My hands shook, but I kept going. Page after page, signature after signature. My son's name, over and over, giving consent to things he didn't understand. I shoved the papers back into their neat pile before my time ran out. My stomach twisted. These weren't investments, they were traps, and Noah had been signing them blindly. But the papers weren't enough. Not for Noah. He'd find a way to explain them away. He'd tell me companies change names, or that Claire knew what she was doing, or that his father had vouched for them. No, I needed something stronger. I needed their voices. So I made a plan. A week later, I pretended to leave town. I told Noah I was driving to my sister's in Phoenix for a few days. I packed a suitcase, printed out directions, and made a show of loading the car. From his window, Claire and Martin watched me drive off. I even waved, but a few streets over, I circled back and parked behind an old oak tree that blocked the house from view. My heart beat hard in my throat. It felt reckless, foolish even, but I knew it was the only way. When Noah left for his office later that morning, I slipped back inside the house using my spare key. The living room was empty, but I could hear voices in the kitchen. I crept toward the sound, my phone ready. Claire's voice came first. "She's gone now. Finally." I thought she'd never stop asking questions. Martin laughed softly. "Doesn't matter. Noah signs whatever you put in front of him. He trusts every word. The kid's desperate for family. Makes him easy to handle." My hands trembled as I hit record. Claire's voice again. Lower, urgent. "What if she comes back? What if she finds something?" "She won't," Martin said. "And even if she does, Noah won't believe her. He'd rather be broke and loved than rich and alone." The words cut me like a knife. They kept talking, their voices sharp and businesslike. Claire mentioned another 50,000, maybe 75, if they timed it right. Martin bragged about how perfect the setup was. Noah paying them to rob him, too blind to notice. 10 minutes of poison. 10 minutes of my son's trust ripped apart in their voices, and I caught every word. When they moved to the living room, I slipped back to the office, phone clutched like a lifeline. I listened again to the recording, just to be sure. The sound of their voices filled my ears, cold and certain. There was no mistaking what I'd heard. Proof. The kind of proof no excuse could erase. Still, I didn't rush. I stayed hidden until the house was quiet again, then slipped back out, heart pounding, and drove straight to Noah's office. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly the skin on my knuckles went pale. When I arrived, I walked into his office and locked the door behind me. He looked up, surprised. "Mom? I thought you were in Phoenix." "I was supposed to be," I said, placing my phone on his desk. "But something came up. Something you need to hear." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, already weary. "If this is more paranoia, just listen." I pressed play. Martin's voice filled the room. "Noah signs whatever you put in front of him. He trusts every word." Claire's voice followed. "What if she comes back? What if she finds something?" Martin again. "She won't. And even if she does, Noah won't believe her." I watched Noah's face as the truth unfolded. The color drained. His jaw tightened. His hands gripped the armrests. By the time the recording ended, he was staring at my phone like it had burned him. That's them," he whispered. "Yes," I said softly. "I recorded it this morning, at your house, after they thought I'd left." Silence filled the office, heavy and thick. For the first time, Noah had nothing to say. No defense. No excuse. Just the sharp, undeniable sting of betrayal. He leaned forward, elbows on his desk, head in his hands. "They really think I'm that easy to fool?" I reached across, touched his arm. "I'm afraid so. And Noah, the papers you've been signing, I think you need a professional to look at them. Some of those companies don't exist." His eyes closed. He breathed out slow, like a man realizing his foundation wasn't stone but sand. "How long has this been going on?" "I don't know. But we need to stop it now." And sitting there in his office, with the evidence between us, I knew the time for suspicion was over. The time for proof had arrived. When I pressed play on the recording in Noah's office, the voices filled the room and everything changed. I watched him closely, like a mother watching a fever. He didn't shout. He just went very quiet. The kind of silence that means the ground under you has shifted. He stood up after the recording ended. "Freeze everything," he said. "Change passwords. Contact the bank. No more signatures without a lawyer." His voice was steady and sharp, the man I'd always admired for running a company. I felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief we had proof, anger at what they had done. We called the lawyer. She moved faster than I expected, blunt and efficient. "You've got fraud indicators," she said. "Shell companies, false invoices, transfers to accounts with no clear owners." She recommended forensic accountants and told us how to secure records. It felt good to take action, but the hardest part remained, facing them. Noah wanted to confront them. He said he needed the truth out in the open. He wanted them to see what they had done, to hear the evidence. So he invited Claire and Martin to dinner. He told them it was personal, nothing more. They arrived with smiles practiced like theater masks. At first, they tried to charm their way out. Claire spoke of panic and necessity, Martin of missteps and regret. They played the roles they'd always used when under pressure, victims of circumstance. Noah listened, quiet and contained. Then he played the recording. Hearing their own words in the room stripped them bare. The smugness and planfulness that had sounded ordinary in the recording hit differently when attached to living faces. Claire's jaw tightened. Martin's confident face flickered. For a moment they tried denial, but the recording kept them honest in a way arguments cannot. Noah asked clear questions. How long? How much? Who else? They tried to minimize, to blame stress and loneliness, then to bargain. They promised repayment that sounded like more schemes. Martin tried to step into the father role, offering apologies wrapped in excuses. Noah's face softened for a second, then hardened. "Earning forgiveness doesn't include stealing," he said quietly. "It doesn't include forging documents or treating me like a source of funds." They left that night under a tense hush, making threats that tasted hollow. The house felt empty afterward, like a stage after the curtains fall. We sat in the kitchen and let the quiet settle. I felt both exhausted and oddly light, like the weight of suspicion had been turned into something real and useful. Noah moved fast. He turned over evidence to the detective. The lawyer suggested. The detective listened carefully, then began tracing transfers and accounts. Forensic accountants followed, untangling a web of invoices and shell entities. The technical part was messy and slow. Subpoenas, account freezes, bank cooperation, but the pattern was there. Small, repeated transfers masked as household or tax payments. Payments to companies that existed only on paper. A careful, patient scheme. When the local paper picked up a version of the story, Noah braced for ridicule. He worried people would call him naive. "They'll say I should have seen it," he told me one night. I took his hand and said, "You loved. That's not a weakness. It's who you are." There were legal settlements, interviews, and a long list of victims who came forward once the pattern was public. Claire and Martin faced charges. Some assets were recovered, some refunds won through frozen accounts and restitution orders. The law moved at its own pace, slow but steady, and it brought consequences. But the hardest thing to repair was not the money. It was the idea Noah had held of what family meant. He had hoped for repair, for a father returning to make amends. He had hoped his marriage would be a safe harbor. Those hopes didn't disappear overnight. Their collapse left a hollow that legal victories couldn't fill. Still, I watched him heal in small ways. He returned to work with a new caution. He put systems in place to review any financial changes. He started sleeping a little better. He laughed at small things again. He dated cautiously when the time felt right, slower than before. The change was subtle, but steady. For me, confronting them confirmed an old truth. Love doesn't blind you to all things. Sometimes, love needs a clear-eyed protector. Being a mother meant stepping into that role, even if it made me feel intrusive or harsh. I had gathered proof, and in doing so I'd given my son the chance to see what he could no longer afford to ignore. We didn't celebrate when the legal process began, but we did breathe. The confrontation had been ugly and necessary. It exposed the lie, and that exposure began the slow work of repair. Some nights we cooked together and talked about nothing important. Those small routines felt like stitches in a wound. When Claire and Martin finally faced the courts, their faces were smaller than I expected. The confidence they had displayed for years had been worn away by consequence. I felt a complicated thing then, not joy at their fall, but relief that truth had a shape, and that shape had finally been recognized by other people who could hold it. Time has a way of softening the edges of pain. Months after the confrontation, we could sit in the living room without the air feeling tight. Noah's trust learned borders. He still loved, but he asked better questions. He measured eagerness with evidence. He kept his heart open with a broader shield. We learned lessons, and slowly, step by step, we rebuilt the fragile trust between us. In the end, the confrontation didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the betrayal, but it shifted the story. It turned secret theft into a public fact and allowed repair to begin. And for that, I was grateful. The day after the confrontation, the house felt different, quieter, yes, but not in a peaceful way. More like a storm had passed, leaving the air heavy and damp, the branches bent. I walked through the rooms and felt the absence of their voices. No Claire's laugh, no Martin's smooth stories, just silence, thick and strange. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Noah didn't say much that morning. He sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee going cold, staring out the window as if the yard might offer answers. He looked older, heavier somehow, like someone who had carried a weight too long. "What now?" he asked me. "Finally." "Now," I said. "We get your life back." The lawyer and accountant helped us move quickly. Passwords were changed, bank accounts frozen. A forensic team started tracing the money trail. They confirmed what we already knew in our bones. The investments Martin had pushed were empty shells. The expenses Claire had submitted were covers for transfers into accounts they controlled. Together, over a year, they had siphoned nearly $75,000. Not enough to bankrupt Noah, but enough to wound him. Enough to prove their intentions had never been love. Detectives interviewed Noah at his office. He answered their questions carefully, though I could see his eyes darken every time he had to say his father's name or his wife's. They took the recording I'd made, the documents I'd photographed, and the statements from the dealership. The picture became clearer with every piece. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a con. A few weeks later, arrests were made. Claire and Martin were led away in handcuffs, their faces pale but still trying to hold on to dignity. The local paper ran a story: tech entrepreneur, targeted by family fraud. Reporters lingered outside his office for days, eager for quotes. Noah hated the attention. "I already feel like a fool," he told me one night. "Now the whole town knows." "You're not a fool," I said, taking his hand. "You're someone who wanted to believe in love. That doesn't make you foolish. It makes you human." Slowly, the case moved forward. Plea deals were offered, hearings scheduled. In the end, both were sentenced to time in prison, with restitution orders attached. Only some of the money was recovered. The rest was gone, spent or hidden beyond reach. But it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the betrayal. And betrayal lingers. In the months that followed, I watched Noah wrestle with it. He questioned everything: his judgment, his worth, his ability to trust. One night, he asked me quietly, "How do I know I'm really good at business, Mom? Maybe I just got lucky. Maybe I'm not as smart as I thought." I shook my head. Luck doesn't build a company from nothing. Luck doesn't create jobs or design programs. That was you. Don't let their lies erase your truth. Still, the wounds didn't heal overnight. He worked long hours, buried himself in tasks he could control. He kept his circle small, cautious. And I stayed close, making dinners, keeping routine steady, offering quiet company when words felt too sharp. 3 months later, he laughed again. A real laugh, sudden and bright. Over something small, a burnt pancake I had flipped wrong. That sound was the first sign of healing. 6 months later, we sat together in court for the restitution hearing. Claire and Martin looked different in their prison uniforms, smaller somehow, ordinary. Gone were the polished smiles and confident gestures. They were just people, stripped of their performance. The judge reviewed the case, acknowledged the partial recovery of funds, and closed the file. "Do you have anything you'd like to say?" the judge asked Noah. He stood, his voice calm. "I don't need apologies. I don't need explanations. What I want is for this story to help others see how easy it is to be blinded by hope. I wanted a father, I wanted a family, and I trusted the wrong people because of it. But I've learned, I'll be more careful, and I'll keep going. There was a dignity in his words that made me proud. He hadn't let bitterness win. When we walked out of the courthouse that day, the sun was bright, the air crisp. Noah looked lighter, like a man closing a heavy book and putting it back on the shelf. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Like I can finally move forward," he said. "Like the chapter's closed." He paused. "Funny thing is, I thought I'd miss them. The family dinners, the idea of it all. But I don't. This feels more like family than anything we had with them." He smiled at me then. A real, easy smile. Because it's real. We went home and cooked dinner together. Pasta with mushrooms and extra garlic, his favorite. We sat at the same table where the lie had unraveled months before. This time, there were no performances, no secrets, just us. As we ate, Noah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thanks for not giving up on me," he said softly. "That's what family does," I replied. "We stay, even when it's hard, even when no one else does." The months that followed weren't perfect, but they were ours. We rebuilt routines. He worked on his company with new caution, wiser now, but not closed off. I visited often, cooked meals, filled the house with ordinary warmth. Slowly, the sharp edges of betrayal dulled into scars, reminders of pain, but no longer bleeding. Sometimes, I still think of that Christmas dinner, the spilled wine on the floor, the fainting act, the question that started it all. "Did you like the car I gave you?" Such a simple question, and yet it cracked open the truth. Looking back now, I realize that betrayal is never really about money. It's about trust. It's about love. It's about people you let close enough to hurt you. But if you survive it, if you face it, you come out stronger. And Noah did. We both did. Family, I've learned, isn't about who shares your blood or your last name. It's about who stays when the storm comes. It's about who fights for you when you're too blind to see the danger. It's about who sits beside you when the truth is too heavy to carry alone. By that measure, our family is small, just a mother and her son. But it's real, and sometimes real is more than enough.